Hi, welcome to episode 13. Lucky number 13. Truly is my lucky number. Probably it's not your lucky number. Staffing and registration. I don't know, it's just a stupid pun. I'm going to talk about staffs and I'm going to talk about register. And let's do that. So last time we talked a lot about cliffs, right? And let's go to the good old viola cliff. It's not a cliff you probably have to use, so that's why I want to use it to talk more abstractly. Remember, this used to be a C, now it looks like whatever you want to imagine that is. And it tells you that this is middle C. And by the way, this set of lines is called a staff. You know, I don't know why it's called a staff, but it is. And in the olden days, people drew the lines individually, like with a ruler or with a thing called a rostrum that has like 5 pens hooked together, and you just like get to draw one line. If you look at like old Bach manuscripts, the staff lines are all wiggly because he didn't use a ruler, but he had a rostrum, so he was like brrr, and they look all kind of funny and wavy. Tangent. I don't know why it's called a staff. It is called a staff. And like I said, staffs used to be variable in how many lines they had. There's been as few as 1 or 0 and up to, I don't know what the limit. I know I've seen some old music on like 8 or 9 staff lines at least. But we've settled on 5. 5 is a nice number. And it looks really good on viola when we talk about C. C and middle C are kind of central pitches in music education. I know it's weird. If you're not used to it, you would think A is like the main pitch. But no, C is the main pitch, and it's for a reason that we'll get to later. But kind of the referential note on no matter what you're talking about, like the note from which all notes are referred to from is middle C. And in an alto clef, here, I'll draw another one. In an alto clef, middle C is on the middle line. If you're a viola player, your bottom note is also a C. This is the lowest note you can play on a viola. It's the lowest string on a viola open. And then there's another C right up here. So there's this nice symmetry in the alto clef that I really like. You go down, timeout. I forgot to talk about ledger lines. So when you have notes that go off the bottom or the top of the staff, say I'm like trying to go down and down and down, you get to the bottom, you just draw a little extra line. And then for every note that you want to keep going, you have to give it its own ledger lines. That's what those are called. And they just extend the staff, right? So if this note was C, then this note is B, and this is A, and this is G again. Because remember, we're going around at the same time we're going down in pitch, we're going around the pitch class circle backwards. So C, B, A, G, F, E, D. Remember that? What staffs help us do is find out both the pitch class and the pitch of a note. And so there's a lot of every kind of pitch class on every staff. If you just tell someone to play a C, on most instruments, they're going to be able to play at least 2, usually more like 4 or 5 or 8 different Cs. And you have to specify. And we have a way of specifying which C is which. We call middle C, this C, C4. Just like the kind of explosive. And we call the one below it C3. Can you guess what we call the one above it? Yeah, that's right. Good guess. It's C5. We've talked about alto clef enough by now, don't you think? Sorry, violists. Let's go to the normal clefs that we normally talk about. And we'll do it the way you'll normally see them in music. And that is, when most people think about music, one of the common things they'll see is a set of 2 staffs, one with a treble clef and one with a bass clef. Remember, the treble clef is a G clef telling you that the line on the second line up is a G, and the bass clef is an F clef telling you that the second line down is an F. we join them together with a line and a brace. We call this a brace. And this is what piano music reads off of. And as a general rule, not an absolute set in stone rule, as a general rule, in a lot of piano music, the left hand is written on this staff and the right hand is written on this staff. There's a few other instruments. Most all the keyboard instruments read 2 staffs. Organ music actually reads 3 staffs. Every once in a while, piano music will have a 3rd staff or even a 4th staff. I'm looking at you, Rachmaninoff. And then most other instruments, by and large, other than viola, just read either the treble clef or the bass clef, depending on if they're a high instrument or a low instrument. It's that simple nowadays. So I taught you all those other clefs for nothing? No, not really. It's just to help you understand and to show you the way of thinking that resulted in, after a long history, these being our main clefs. When we put these 2 clefs together with this brace, and this is the treble clef, and this is the bass clef, the whole shebang we call the grand staff. Isn't it grand? In the grand staff, the same C4, the C4 that was this middle line in alto clef, we actually can't write it without a ledger line. If we wrote it in the treble clef, it would be right here. And if we wrote it in the bass clef, it would be right here. And this is one of the first weird and confusing things when people first start learning music notation. How are these the same note? It looks like this one is higher. I thought notes that were higher up are higher. Well, the grand staff is a weird thing because this is C4 and this is C4, and it leaves you lots of space to keep moving up. So if we wanted from C4 to go up the scale in the bass clef, we could. We could just keep adding ledger lines. And sure enough, this is not uncommon to see a bunch of ledger lines. And you might be thinking, well, if that's a C and this is a D and an E, an F and a G and an A, isn't that stupid? Shouldn't we just write it up here or here or here or here or here? Because these are the same exact notes. These are all the 4, E4, F4, G4, A4. These are all 4. Well, a lot of times there's some other reason why we don't write it on the staff. Like I said, sometimes in a piano music, for instance, they'll keep notes in the bass clef staff so that you know that your left hand is still playing them. Other times there's more than 2 voices going on, and like they'll keep one down here to separate it. There's a lot of reasons. Just know that it happens. And then same with when we're going down. When we go down notes, we can just start adding ledger lines below the treble clef, and those notes get way down into what could be written in the bass clef, right? Here's F, and it could be written in the bass clef. But it's not. We don't do it that way. We use ledger lines, and you can use as many as you want. Let's make another grand staff, and let's get into register. So, line, brace, treble clef, bass clef. Like I said, this is C4. Both of these are C4. They're the same note. I think I mentioned this before, but some people when they first learn, want to write middle C literally in the middle of the staffs. Obviously, it totally makes sense. It's called middle C. It is one ledger line down. But remember, you always want your ledger lines to be as far away from the staff as each line is from each other on the staff. You want to preserve that spacing. Otherwise, when people try and read your music, when they just glance at this, to me, just glancing at it, I would think that's an F, because I would think there's a line here for A and a line here for C, even if you didn't write them, because that's about how far below an F is. And it would take my brain an extra step to understand that you meant for that to be a C. Don't do it. Write your C just 1 line's length below the treble clef or 1 line's length above the bass clef. And like I said, this is C4, and here's where C5 is. And up here, 2 ledger lines above that clef, staff, is where C6 is. And if we go downwards, here's C3, and here's C2. And if we go down, we could go down another octave and we'd call it C1, and we could go down yet another and we could call it C0, and we could keep going up to C7. At a certain point, you're gonna get out of what most humans can hear as a pitch. When you make a pitch too low, it starts to break up and we hear it like a kind of a sound, like a purring sound instead of an actual pitch. And when you make it too high, we just can't hear it. And that gets worse as you get older. I can't hear a lot of notes that my students can hear. Within this register, we call every note the note of its register. So this is like the 4 register, all the way up to C5. This is like the 5 register, right? This is the 3 register. This is the 2 register. So like if we wanted to write this note, it's an important note. This is A4 because it's the A in the 4th register, right? C4 is middle C. Everything is going to be whatever it is 4 until we get up to C5. A4 is what most instruments tune to. Well, not most, but all the instruments that aren't brass instruments. If you go to a symphony concert, you'll hear usually 2 tuning notes getting played, and usually one of them is A4, and it's played by the oboe generally, and that note is 440 hertz. We'll talk about what a hertz is someday, but that's what we generally use, though lots of symphonies use a slightly higher A, and there's all kinds of kind of new agey theories about the benefits of using a lower A and how 440 hertz is, let's not get into all that right now. It's kind of weird, right? Some of them are really obvious, like this would be F2. If this F would be F3, right? F4 would be right here. But here's something weird. Let's say we wanted to talk about B sharp. So let's say we wanted to name this note. Here it's a B, and it's B sharp. And even though it's actually the same note, the same sound, you'd hit the same key on a keyboard as this note, this B sharp 4 and C5 get different numbers. There's something that we call enharmonically equivalent. They are not the same note. I can't believe I said that out loud a second ago. They are enharmonically equivalent notes. They behave differently. And like I might have mentioned before, music is all about behaviors and relationships, not identities. Here's where it gets super weird. Let's say we had that B sharp, and then we wanted to talk about C flat. Now, if you go to a piano, this B sharp 4 is actually a higher sound than this C flat 5. The B sharp 4 is enharmonically equivalent to a C, and the C flat 5 is enharmonically equivalent to a B, but we still call it C flat 5 because all we care about is the letter name when we're trying to figure out the register of a pitch. It's kind of weird, right? Let's talk really quick because there's a neat historical aside. I talked about Guido d'Arezzo, the guy who made up solfege. And Guido had his bottom note that he had in his system was G. And I believe it was this G, although he wasn't using the same clefs we are. But let's say it was this G, and it was the bottom note in his system. And instead of using numbers for registers, he had Greek letters for some of his registers. And I forget what a gamma looks like. You'll have to forgive me, I'm not a Greek scholar. But this one was called the gamma ut. Now remember, ut was do back then. And do, and Guido's system of solfege, do wasn't always C. And the bottom one was called the gamma ut. And some linguists think that's where our word gamut came from, as in run the gamut. Like start from the beginning and go all the way through. Start from the gamma ut, from the start. Run the gamut. So music theory sometimes has an effect on etymology. That's it. Goodbye. See you next time.